This is a Flying Cow production.
There was a man named Worrell, Ernest B. Worrell. Let's celebrate this cat.
Well, hello and welcome back to Around the Worrell, our Patreon exclusive podcast where we talk all about all things Ernest P. Worrell. You're a patron, so you know, but I'll tell you anyway. I am, of course, Clay Johnson, the Flying Cow himself. And here with me, as always, is my co-host for this podcast, the litigator, Loren Collins. Loren, how are you, sir?
Doing good, Clay. How about yourself?
Doing all right. Doing all right. I mean, anybody that's watching on the video can tell I probably look a little tired. That's just how I look right now. But you know, I'm doing okay. Just been a tiring week, but I am ready to talk about this film. How are you, sir?
I'm doing okay. I'm ready to talk about it too.
Yeah,
I was thinking, it's a nice change of pace from having to watch 4 hours of 4+ hours for the last episode.
I was about to say. I mean, I'm sure you're probably close to right, but it felt like so much more.
It did.
It felt so long. I mean, like I said, each episode was only 20 minutes, but it was a long 20 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Each one of those things. And so, yes, this film was a refreshing change of pace because it wasn't even a full hour and a half. It was only an hour and 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So, yes, we are, of course, for anyone who is following along, knows that today we are discussing Ernest Goes to Jail. This film came out in 1990, and it was, of course, directed by John Cherry, written by Charlie Cohen. The music was done by both Kirby Shellstad, I believe, and Bruce Arntzen, who not only wrote the songs, but performed all of them.
Oh.
He wrote and performed all of the songs. I'm assuming that Kirby Shellstad did more of the interstitial music.
Yes.
Things like that. But
Bruce Arntzen, of course, the winner of my Auntie Nelda award from the previous episode. Yes.
Right. He was the famous Existo.
Yes.
From that. But I mean, I think this is the first time that he's made a contribution to the films. Is that correct? Or was he in Saves Christmas?
I don't know. I have to check his IMDb. I know he contributed music to, I think, more than one film, but I don't know if he sang anything, for instance. I know he did not write Gee, I'm Glad It's Raining, because I checked that the other day.
Right. Well, yeah, that was that couple, that team that did that. But yeah, so you know, a kind of holdover from Hey Vern, It's Ernest, but this obviously is a completely different film. So, you know, before we jump into the film itself, go ahead.
To answer your question, yeah, he was a composer for Hey Vern, It's Ernest, but this was the first film he was a composer for. He was a composer on several more after this, but this was
right. The first one of the films that he contributed to. Yeah. So yeah, you know, and I mean, you know, the music in this is pretty fun. Again, it's one of those that you know, I would have assumed that some of the music was like pop music or something like that, but it's all originals written specifically for the film, and like I said, all performed by Bruce Arntzen. Yeah, but I do want to ask before we jump into the film itself.
Sure.
You know, we've touched on this a little bit, but what was your background with this film specifically?
This film is the first Ernest film I know for certain I saw in theaters. I remember seeing the ads for this. I remember seeing this film. This also was the film that introduced Ernest's dog Rimshot, which led to me naming our family dog Rimshot.
Absolutely. Yeah, I will say this is, I know for a fact, the only Ernest film that I saw in theaters. Which is weird because I know we were an Ernest family. I mean, between my dad and myself, we were huge Ernest fans. I think my mom thought some of it was fun, but wasn't necessarily completely her brand of humor, but she dealt with it for us. But for whatever reason, this is the only one that I know for certain that we saw in theaters. In fact, I know it's the only one from this point on. We didn't see any of the following ones, and I would be surprised if I somehow forgot that we saw any of the previous films.
I can check with my sibs before the next episode. I think we probably saw Ernest Scared Stupid in the theater. I just have no specific recollection of it. I know I saw that film around the time it came out at the very least. I just can't say for certain that it was in the theater and not like on home video.
Right. Well, and this is also one of the ones that I know for certain that we owned on home video. In fact, I'm pretty sure we owned the big four. Camp, Saves Christmas, Goes to Jail, and Scared Stupid. But
the Ernest quadrilogy.
Yes, I mean, obviously there were many more, but I mean, how they didn't invent this word for Ernest before the Alien films, I don't know. But because Ernest did it way before they did. But this was definitely one of the films that was on heavy rotation for me as a kid. In fact, as a kid, I probably would have called it my favorite just because I watched it so much. But so let's go ahead and let's jump into kind of the story of this film, and because basically it meets us once again in a different part of the Worrelliverse, the Ernest multiverse. We are now this is another one of we're back in Tennessee. This one was again filmed completely in Nashville, Tennessee. In fact, a lot of the filming was done in the Tennessee State Penitentiary.
No, the exterior shots. They shot at one of the penitentiaries for like external shots, and like I assume also for like some of the yard things. The
filming took place at Tennessee State Prison for 3 days.
So they did some temporary stuff there. All the interior stuff. There was like a shoe factory, an abandoned shoe factory. They built like a 3-story jail set inside.
Well, because we'll get into it, but the setup for this prison is not a contemporary prison.
No,
they're going for a more pre revised prison system.
A very Shawshank feeling prison.
Yes. But the story in this one is basically Ernest has a job at a bank as the janitor. And his next door neighbors are Chuck and Bobby, who are the security guards for the bank. But I assume, based on the fact that they give Ernest a ride to and from work, that they're only the night security guards.
Yes. There's a later scene where folks are arriving and Chuck is asking Ernest to leave. So it seems pretty heavily implied they're the night security, not the day security. Yeah,
right, because that's obviously when Ernest cleans up is overnight. But yes, he is the janitor at the bank, but he also has his grand ambition in this, as we've established in previous Ernest films. Ernest always has very modest ambitions. You know,
he's a man of humble dreams. Yes,
exactly. But they are for him, big dreams. His ambition in this film is to become a bank clerk, which I believe would be the same as a bank teller.
I took that to mean exactly that. Yes.
Yeah. So that is his big ambition, to be a bank clerk, a bank teller. And of course, he has a contentious relationship with the owner or the manager of the bank, Oscar Pendle Smythe, played by Dan Legant. But he is aided by his co-worker, Charlotte Sparrow, played by Barbara Tyson. Although at the time, apparently, she was credited as Barbara Bush. Which, yeah, I didn't really look up why. Oh, yeah, she was just credited as Barbara Bush in some of her early roles. It doesn't say why she used that name. I mean, this was the early 90s. That was the name of our first lady. Maybe
yes, at the time, and the previous second lady for as far back as 1981. So
yeah. So I wonder. You got to wonder. If maybe it was like she was using a maiden name, her mother's maiden name, or if it was just, well, that's the same name as the first lady. Maybe that'll get me some attention.
Yeah.
But yes, so he works at the bank and he ends up getting a jury duty during the trial. The person on trial realizes that he is a dead ringer for his boss, the crime boss who still somehow runs his crime ring from prison, Mr. Felix Nash, also played by Jim Varney. And through convoluted means, they end up switching places. And for a time, Ernest goes along and tries to play Nash completely unbelievably. But Nash tries to take advantage of Ernest's situation outside until eventually Ernest breaks out and tries to bring Nash to justice. Yes. That obviously there are more nuances to the plot. I mean, as many nuances as there are in an Ernest film. But that's the basics.
That summary is that is a perfectly accurate summary of all the major plot beats in this film. And yet, the thing I remember from watching the commercials for this film, and the trailers back when it first came out, and what's evident throughout the film is just tacked on multiple times through there. Ernest also gets superpowers.
Yes. I'm glad you put it that way, because that is exactly what it is.
Yes.
Ernest apparently is a mutant.
Yes.
In this universe, because electricity, he gets electrocuted, fatally electrocuted.
I feel like at least 4 times in this film. Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yeah, yes, it is. I will say the second time I wouldn't call fatal. Although it seems
the second time's not fatal. The second time is still minor. It feels unnecessary, but it's still there as a beat where he's magnetic.
Right. Yes, exactly. But the thing about it is that, as you say, every time, instead of dying, he instead becomes magnetic. The third time it does straight up give him superpowers.
Yes. Well, and then the fourth time he can fly.
True. But yeah, the first 2 times he just becomes magnetic. And yes, that is, it's a minor subplot, but it is because honestly, without that, the rest of the film wouldn't work, because Ernest would have died.
Well, I mean, you just wouldn't have the he gets electrified bits, or
Right.
again,
Yeah,
the
they
comic
would
too,
have found a different way around him getting out of prison.
he's a live action Looney Tune. The man can get electrocuted and just come back like
Yes,
birds. And,
exactly. He is at a certain point in this film, Ernest becomes a live action cartoon.
Yes.
And I do want to mention it just because we've said his name so many times. To this point, this is the first time that we have a film where Ernest is actually finally the main character in his own film.
True.
Because like we mentioned, both for Goes to Camp and Saves Christmas, he's really a prominent side character. Yeah. But really, this is the first time that he is straight up driving the action. He is definitely the protagonist in this film, whereas in other films, I would argue that it was other people. It's hard to say 100% who's the protagonist in Goes to Camp because it switches. Yeah. You could argue that it's sometimes the kids. You could argue that it's sometimes other people, but it kind of switches. Saves Christmas, it's straight up Santa Claus. Mm-hmm. But in this one, Ernest is inarguably the protagonist of this film. He is the one driving the action. And I also want to mention that, you and I are also big Muppets fans. Mm-hmm. Just me, or did they straight up steal the plot of this for Muppets Most Wanted? I mean, I'm sure, yes. I'm sure there are other people out there that are like, well, that plot has been done. I'm sure there are. I'm sure there are a lot of other films that deal the plot with the plot of mistaken identity, where the lead gets thrown into prison, in place of the real villain. But these are the two most prominent, ones in my head at the moment. And it does. It straight up feels like Muppets Most Wanted kind of, cribbed this from Ernest Goes to Jail. Yeah. I mean, obviously in that, Kermit doesn't get electric powers. No. But
that was an early draft. But yeah,
yes,
they
decided to drop that.
Too similar. Yeah. No, obviously you do still have the doppelganger shift that's swapped in there. But I mean, admittedly, I don't personally see as much resemblance to it. When I was logging this film on Letterboxd, by the way, one of the top reviews on it was someone saying that this laid the foundation for Shawshank Redemption a couple of years later as another jailhouse escape film.
Sure. I will say, as a kid, I got parts of this somehow confused with I believe it's early 90s or maybe late 80s Michael Keaton film Johnny Dangerously.
Oh, I've never actually seen that one. Yeah.
I mean, it's
like a lighthearted gangster movie, right? Like
yes, I was about to say it's basically a spoof on gangster films. But there's also, just like in this film, there is the scene where they are on death row on their way to, I believe the electric chair in both films. Excuse me. But in Johnny Dangerously, while he's going down the row to the electric chair, different prisoners are like giving him things as he goes, and by the end, based on these tiny little things that people have given them, he's put together a machine gun. And for some reason, I always, as a kid, expected that scene in this film.
I mean, you do have the scene where Ernest makes a machine gun out of like soap.
out of a bar of soap, which is probably where I got confused. I will say that doesn't really seem like something Ernest would do, make an actual machine gun and pull it on people. It's one thing to make a soap and disguise it. But Ernest is not really that violent. So, yeah, like I said, for some reason I always got those two scenes conflated. But so getting into kind of the meat of the film, as I will say, one of the first things I wrote down, the intro for this film is so much fun because it is, kind of a classic intro to a film with a song and the title card and the introduction of the cast over it. But this is the type of film intro that I don't think was really big in the 90s. I think that like film intros were really like big in like the 60s and the 70s. I mean, we're talking an intro that was similar to like the like a theme song for a television show, introducing kind of the cast of characters we were about to meet and the theme that we were about to enter into. I believe at this time, the only type of film that would have been doing this type of intro would have been something like a James Bond.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, the Bond films are notorious for that. Yeah.
Right. But most other films weren't doing this type of intro. So, and obviously, it is not in the same vein as James Bond. I mean, I will say that their use of like the shadow and the colors was really cool. That was very typical of those types of films. But then, of course, they were using kind of the more types of graphics that they used in not as cheesy, but more types of graphics that they used in like the interstitials for like Hey Vern, It's Ernest, with like the photos, but the photos weren't straight up photos. There was some sort of filter or something done to them that made them look kind of grainy. Or
last time I compared it a little bit to Terry Gilliam, which it's not entirely like that, but
there is some sort of like static filter or some aging that they're doing to the images of Ernest. I mean, honestly, what they are kind of is very similar to like GIFs that we have today, because it's just quick images of Ernest like making faces and stuff like that, and then going away. But they are.
The inspiration for this probably ties into whoever's idea was to have like that Norman Rockwell, long intro for Ernest Saves Christmas. That they. It's not. It wasn't animated in the same.
Right. I was about to say it's a little different.
It's a different kind of intro, but they just dedicated like 2+ minutes to basically play music and just show title cards.
Right. Again, introducing the cast and kind of the vibe for the film.
Yeah.
Whereas in this one, in that one it was A Christmas Tree.
Yeah.
So in this one, it's introducing. We know the name of the film is Ernest Goes to Jail. So the song playing over the credits is called Doin' Time. Again, as we mentioned, written and performed by Bruce Arnson. I mean, it's pretty, basic, but it's fun. Just the visuals of it, it's a great way to introduce an Ernest film. I will say, I'm pretty sure they do a very similar type intro for the next film as well.
Okay. I look forward to seeing that one then.
Yeah. And then they do probably my favorite intro for Ernest Writes Again, but we'll get to that, in a few films. Yes. But yeah, so we're introduced to this, this really fun intro, and the very first characters that show up in the film. Do you remember?
Is it the Prison Escape? No.
It's Chuck and Bobby.
It is Chuck and Bobby. Okay.
Chuck and Bobby are the first I believe not long after that we get the scene of because we get introduced to where Ernest is, and everything before we get introduced to the prison set, because we get to see Mr. Nash in shadows and stuff like that. But by that time, we've already introduced the idea of, Ernest getting electrocuted and being magnetic. So we're already introduced to the fact that Ernest is invulnerable, at least to electricity in this film, before we meet the antagonist of the film. But yeah, the film starts off with Chuck and Bobby, and partially because we haven't spent a whole lot of time talking about them in previous films. Chuck and Bobby have a much bigger role in this film than they have in the
they have a bigger role, and they have more interaction with Ernest than they have.
Well, they're his next door neighbors. So they give him. I will say I'm a little disappointed that we don't see more of the trips to the bank with them in the van. The one time we do, it's by that time he's Nash.
I admit too, when we're introduced to the fact that they live next door. And by the way, I think that's the same house that Ernest had in Ernest Saves Christmas, which was, I could be wrong.
Possibly.
I think it's the same back.
I mean, I feel like there were more trees around it, but I think, obviously it's a backlot. They probably moved.
But regardless, Ernest lived in Florida in that film, and he's in Tennessee in this one. So, and now Chuck and Bobby are his neighbors. When he especially goes to visit them, when he gets his jury notice, he goes, jumps across the property line like it's a minefield, and he's nervous about this. And then Bobby's shooting towards the door. It's like all of this feels like setup for something later, and none of it pays off.
I will say, I think because they're very playful with the homes of the characters that we get to meet in this film. It's very, at least the exteriors. The interior also of Ernest, but mostly the exterior of Chuck and Bobby's, very much fit the personalities of the characters. Ernest, I mean, he's got a giant ice cream cone outside of his house and a permanent Christmas light set up around the letter E. And then, of course, inside, he's got, all of these Rube Goldberg machines to do various things. One of the first things I wrote down after seeing this is I'm like, Ernest, why are you trying to be a bank clerk? Just sell some of your inventions, dude. And I think you'll be much better set up. I will say my only qualm with the way, because, he has all of these different machines to turn on his television and to do various things when he walks
Reminds me, frankly, of Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
It's 100% inspired by, I think there's a mix between that and Doc Brown's house in Back to the Future.
That too,
Yeah.
It predates this, but Wallace and Gromit has similar kinds of big,
Yeah, exactly. There's he also, I believe, the first time we see the inside of his house, we don't actually go through his house. We just see him preparing for his date, in quotes, with Charlotte, basically he's getting ready. His bathtub is a giant washing machine. With different settings, which, I mean, it's silly, but I also thought was cool. He's got this industrial size, body dryer and, this contraption to brush his teeth. But here's the thing. All of this stuff is a little clumsy, but it all works. And so
I was actually happy when he got in the machine. At first, I thought it was going to be some kind of ridiculous, oversized washing machine. But when he got in it as a tub, it's
great.
That's a solid visual joke. I can live with it.
It was great. But like I said, it all works. It's a little clumsy, but it all works. yet somehow he is inept at cleaning a bank. It doesn't really mesh with me. The film almost, I mean, the Ernest films as a whole always kind of play a little bit with Ernest's intelligence. Yeah. But for the most part, it's mostly that he's just naive.
Yeah.
He openly trusts people. He, you know, is always going to do the best for people, even if they are actually scheming against him. Mm-hmm. He always believes the best in people. And so that's where a lot of his buffoonery actually comes from. And yes, he's a little clumsy. There's a scene in particular that I don't want to just mention here. I want to give some attention to in just a little bit, but you know, it's played off a bit like a Mr. Bean thing, but he's not an idiot. But somehow, with cleaning, he seems to be inept.
I mean, I think it's just like the Homer Simpson approach to intelligence. He's exactly as intelligent as like the scene needs him.
As the scene needs him to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, you know, it'd be one thing if it was consistent within the film, at least. Because, you know, at least, you know, Homer, at least in each episode, has the same level of intelligence. It doesn't necessarily change from scene to scene. Whereas this, I mean, I guess you could argue that most of the issues that he has with being a janitor are not that he doesn't know how to clean. It's more that he's clumsy and he causes, but you'd feel like if he was that clumsy with cleaning, then he wouldn't be able to put together the stuff that he does at home either.
Yeah.
And I mean, because the first time that anyone trips on this, because his entire house is a trip hazard.
Yeah.
Yet he's super clumsy at the bank, but he comes home and he's super adept without even paying attention to what he's doing at stepping over this stuff. It's Nash that trips on it. It just feels a little inconsistent to me. I mean, again, I love the visuals that we're getting, and I love the whimsy of it. It just, you know, when I think about it, it feels inconsistent. So, you know, I just wanted to bring that up.
There's a throwaway line that makes me wonder, like, what the rest of his job at the bank is like. Because we see the big opening scene. He gets electrified. He ends up, you know, being chased by cabinets and locks himself in the vault. Yeah. And then Charlotte later on makes some reference to like him waking up every day in the vault. It's like,
right,
just exaggerating, or like, does he electrocute himself regularly at this
I was about to say, yeah, because I'm like, wait, every day. Oh, I mean, she doesn't really seem to be surprised that he's in there. It's more just like, Ernest, why are you? You know, it's more like, because we brought her up, I do want to talk about Charlotte in this film. Because this is the first time, and I'm using the term loosely because it's different than it is in any other film.
Yeah.
But this is the first time that Ernest has a quote unquote love interest. I mean, again, we talked about the fact that you could have argued, and they even there were apparently talks that there were thoughts of Nurse St. Cloud being a pseudo love interest for him, but they don't really do much with that in the film. This is the first time that, you know, there is an obvious, you know, person that Ernest is obviously a little sweet on, and she is at least his friend. Mm-hmm. You know, and to the point where I think the main reason, aside from the fact that, you know, he's on death row and doesn't want to die, but I think the main reason he wants to get out of prison is because Charlotte has been threatened.
Yes.
You know, so she is kind of a you know, a call to action for him, you know. Again, you know, I use the term loosely because Ernest is not your typical, you know, hero in a film. He's not the guy that necessarily gets the girl. And, you know, it's made very clear, you know, that Charlotte is just, and she even says when she invites him to dinner to specifically discuss his attempts to get, the bank clerk job. She wants to help him. And in fact, one of the first things that I wrote down about her is that she is a really good friend to Ernest. She gets there early, sees that he has basically made a mess of his job, helps him fix it, and I'm like, do you get here early every day just to help him fix stuff? Or are there other things that you should be doing that you're just not because you're just a really good friend to Ernest? But, obviously it's played up in different ways. I mean, when it comes to things like, romance and things like that, Ernest is very much seen as naive, almost childlike.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's never really seen super romantic, and if it is, it's usually done more jokingly. But what are your thoughts on this character and their use of her, I guess, as the love interest?
She's sweet. She's feels like a good match for Ernest. Like you said, not overtly romantic, but
Right.
just being friendly.
Yeah.
I will say, and I hate to be slightly mean here, is like, and I don't feel bad about this because Barbara Tyson has a substantial career after
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, she's a Canadian actress.
She's a Canadian actress. She
did a lot of things before this, has done several things after this. Yeah.
She has had a full career.
Right.
She has a very nice voice, but I was underwhelmed by her performance in this film.
I will say she's very underwritten.
Yeah.
The character's not given, aside from being Ernest's friend and, like we said, quote, love interest, she's not given a whole lot outside of that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I went on and on about Harmony Starr because she was a well-rounded character.
Yes.
Unfortunately, Charlotte really isn't. Again, like we said, she's sweet, she's kind, she's a good friend, but there's not really much to her character beyond that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
No, she gets to play friendly with Ernest. She gets to play offended by Nash.
Right.
She gets to defend him up against Mr. Pendlesmythe and whatnot.
Yes. Yeah.
It's just all kind of surface level. Like I feel like, again, like I said, hate. Don't want to be mean about it, but it just feels like it
Right.
felt very low budget movie acting, kind of.
Right. Well, I mean, it's like I said, it's not even a judgment on her or her ability. She just wasn't given a whole lot to work.
Not given a bunch. Let me put it this way. How about this? It reminds me a little bit more of like a performance I would expect out of like Dr. Otto than out of like what we saw in like Ernest Saves Christmas.
Okay. Oh yeah. I mean, but again, not a whole lot to the character, not expected to be much. I will say though, there was a second before she pulled out the only as friends, of course, when she was, you can tell there's a point at which when he is, saying that he wants to be a bank clerk and he's doing his, Ernest Shakespeare, I will be the greatest bank clerk, his little grandstanding bit. There's a bit where you can see her have the idea of, well, we could have dinner and talk about it, where it seems like she's a little bit, I don't want to say smitten, but a little bit like, this might be a fun idea.
I got some of that read out of it. Yeah, that's
yeah.
Cool.
I mean, again, it's not a lot. It's not like there's much, but there's just there's some touching of herself where she feels a little like, oh, this might be nice, kind of,
And I did read somewhere that there apparently once again was discussion about it, in the making of the film, like making her a legitimate romantic interest, and they pushed back against that.
Yeah, I mean, you almost feel like she did that part before they decided against it, because aside from obviously there are she's helping Ernest, and she later calls him the sweetest, kindest person she knows. But you can have affection, that type of affection, for friends.
Yes.
Yeah, I have lots of friends that I feel those types of ways about, that there's nothing romantic there. So you can have those types of feelings, but yeah, it was just kind of the way that she brought it up. And then, right away, she's like, of course, just as friends, just as friends. And the way she sells that, it's like, oh, okay, so no, she doesn't want anything romantic. But it did feel like a bit of a clash, just a little bit there.
Yeah. So here's the thing from IMDb trivia.
Okay.
That doesn't have a source for this, but it says Charlotte Sparrow was originally written to get together with Ernest at the end. Jim Varney and the writers always wanted a love interest for Ernest. Several times he mentions a wife in early commercials.
Right.
Disney, however, vetoed the notion of Ernest experiencing any type of romance or love. Disney told the writers, it says here, quote, and again, I don't have a source of this, but Disney told the writers, quote, he's smooth down there. The writers, yes.
So according to Disney, Ernest is a Ken doll.
Exactly, yes. That's exactly what I was going to say.
I mean, look, number one, in an Ernest film, it would have been the most chaste version of romance,
of course,
that there could have been. But I don't know. When you say that the writers actually conceive, I feel like this would have been the film to do it.
Probably, yeah.
I think
again, I haven't seen anything past Scared Stupid, but it would flow naturally out of this.
Honestly, as far as
like
the
you said a minute ago,
yeah,
his motive for trying to get out of jail as fast as he can is for her at the end of the film. Spoilers, like he does a heroic act of sacrifice to save her.
All we're really lacking here is just a one step further reciprocation from her.
Yeah. And
I don't see anything wrong with that.
Yeah. And I'll say, I was going to say this later, but it seems apropos now, is that I feel like that would give the film a better ending, because the film ends remarkably abruptly.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, we'll definitely talk about it, because honestly, from when Ernest gets back to the bank to the end is the part of the film that I think works the least.
Yeah.
I mean, their fight up until he gets thrown into the cage is fine, but once Ernest, starts floating, gets a little silly, and then, the whole, grabbing the bomb, and I mean, I kind of like that as a symbol of, oh, wow, Ernest sacrificed himself for these people. And obviously, I don't expect them to actually have killed Ernest. I don't have any problem with him coming back. But then, yeah, as you say, it just kind of abruptly ends with him falling on Nash, and not a great looking fall. And, being completely burnt to a crisp. Again, apparently Ernest is immortal in this film. And just doing the, I came, I saw, I got blowed up. And that's the end of the film.
Yes.
Yeah, I would have liked a little bit more, because honestly, my big question at the end of that is, okay, well, where does this version of Ernest go from here? Like, it doesn't give us like any sort of track or trajectory. I mean, all of the previous Ernest films have kind of given us an idea of what the future is going to look like. Ernest saves camp. He's going to be a year-long camp counselor.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, it doesn't give us
absurd, but
it doesn't give resolution to anything other than, well, Ernest got out of jail and Felix was defeated. But like you said, his entire arc of wanting to be a clerk, not touched on. His relationship, even friendship relationship with Charlotte, or his friendship relationship with Chuck and Bobby. We don't see any more of them, really.
Well, and also the way that the warden is put up, I wouldn't be completely surprised if he puts both of them back in prison, because he doesn't seem to there's no differentiation there. He's kind of, he's so cartoonish that he almost comes off as corrupt a little bit.
It depends how cheesy you want to play this, but like the warden shows up, he wants to take both of them back, for instance.
I would have liked it,
and to go back to the romance angle, Charlotte then kisses Ernest and convinces that's how we know he's
at least a kiss on the cheek, something. Something to give us a picture of the future for Ernest. Because, I mean, even in Ernest Saves Christmas, he's now one of Santa's best friends.
Yeah.
There's lots of ideas that could go there.
Santa should go and vouch for the real Ernest at the end of the show.
But as we've mentioned, this is a different reality.
It is true.
So, yeah.
But yeah, we've established at this point that Charlotte, has friendship affection for Ernest. She obviously just had a gut negative reaction to Felix. You could have used that to distinguish the two of them on behalf of the warden. It gives it something a little more emotional, as a
Yeah, I mean, I don't, and because like we said, it's only an hour and 20 minutes. Yeah. You could have tagged on another 10 minutes just to give us a little bit more clarity to kind of see what's next for this iteration of Ernest.
You could have cut out some of the superpowers, honestly. I think the film would be better for it.
I don't know. I really liked the lightning bit that he does in the prison after he gets, hit by the electric chair, and gets those electric powers, because he goes all earnest with it. He gets real goofy and, shooting things with his fingers and, finger guns straight up. It's great.
I can't stress enough. Like, this is why I mentioned the commercial in the trailer earlier, how much the commercials of the trailers leaned on that imagery of Ernest, shooting lightning bolts. And then it's 3 minutes of the film. It's
I mean,
brief,
but it is a very fun part of the film. So they're wanting to accentuate, those types of things. But yeah.
The other thing, while it's on my mind, the other thing that stood out for me going back and watching the trailer, I think I just put it up on YouTube, is that the trailer, in good old 80s fashion, gives away almost the entire film, except for, weirdly enough, one major detail, which is I don't think Felix Nash shows up in it. So,
I was gonna say, I really, now obviously, if you've seen the film or you have seen any Ernest films, you know that the voice of Nash is the voice of Jim Varney. But I love how they shade him in shadow until they bring up the fact that, hey, boss, this guy looks just like you. Oh, really? Because the first time we see him, he's toweling off of his face, and then he brings it down, and we can see that it is Jim Varney playing this villainous role. And you brought it up. I want to talk about Jim Varney's performance as Nash, because it is a completely distinct character that he is playing in the same film. I mean, we've talked about Varney's character acting. It's great. We know that. But what I love is you could have these two characters stand right next to each other and dressed completely the same and know who is who.
Yeah.
Just based on the look. And especially if they spoke, you would know right away. There is such a distinct and yes, of course, it is very, both very arch over the top performances, but they're still very distinct characters. You're not getting one confused for the other. To the point where this film famously was reviewed by How Did This Get Made? And June Diane Raphael made the point that Bad Ernest was rather attractive. And I gotta say, he's a good-looking guy. Jim Varney was a good-looking guy, and as this more kind of sinister, confident guy, he does have a charisma to him.
No, I like his performance as Felix in this thing. I think it adds something to this film that I mean you wouldn't want to replicate this for too many Ernest films, to be honest. To just have doppelgangers running around all the time.
No, but with him playing so many other aspects of Ernest or characters or whatever, it seems like the natural conclusion for him to eventually play his own villain.
Yes. And like you said, other than some of the stuff with the weightless fight at the end, I thought Nash was used pretty well. I thought what little interactions we saw of him with like Charlotte and whatnot, I wish we'd had. You probably couldn't get away with more of him with Charlotte. That's probably the right amount for that.
I was about to say, I think that was the right amount for that.
Yeah, she's having enough of him. But you could have had more with Chuck and Bobby for them, because they're dimmer.
Right. I will say, I think they did a really good job of setting up an antagonistic relationship because Bobby always greets him. And I will say, I don't remember seeing him do this a lot with actual Ernest, but every time he comes upon Nash's Ernest, he greets him by smacking him in the back of the head.
Yep.
Which, not the best idea for this character that has basically been sold to us as, running the gang in jail. Also,
presumably a murderer, because he is on death row.
Oh, at least.
I mean, death row murder.
Obviously, the prison system in this is really cartoonish. I don't want to, unless if there's something else you want to say about Nash. I don't want to leave
to follow up on something else I said earlier,
Yeah.
The thing I wish we got a little more interaction with Chuck and Bobby specifically was, I said earlier, like we established like their house, they have a minefield, and like Bobby shoots at the door. It's like, I thought this was eventually going to be setting up like Nash trying to get to their house, not knowing there's a minefield.
Sure.
And he can't be as cartoonish as Ernest, but like you would have had like an action beat there of Nash, like encountering the minefield. You would have had the beat of Bobby firing through the door and Nash encountering this. Maybe as a matter of confusion, like he legitimately thinks that they're trying to kill him, and no, it's just Bobby doing target practice.
Right. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Could have been played off of Nash. They were set up. They could have been used in that capacity, and then they just weren't.
Sure. I mean, I will say, I don't know that there was a lot of reason for Nash to go over to their house, because Nash decidedly does not like them.
Sure.
But I'm glad you mentioned them, because I do.
If you're trying to draft a reason for this, he's trying to rob the bank. If he wanted to come up with some reason to keep them diverted from the bank in some way.
But in this world, Ernest doesn't seem to have any other mode of transportation. They're his ride.
Oh, yeah.
Plus, at least Chuck is buffoonish enough that he knows he can distract them at the bank.
Yeah.
I'm glad, though, that you mentioned them, because I do want to circle back around to them, because I had a bunch of stuff I wanted to talk about with them that I completely forgot to mention. But I do want to briefly mention, because we mentioned it before, the kind of cartoonishness of the prison. Again, as we mentioned, this prison is more meant to mirror prisons of a much earlier age. They're still using, although I think even at this time, I think Texas was still using the electric chair. A lot of other places had already moved on to lethal injection, but I think there were still one or two places that were still using. This is
90. That sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's, it is not the type of electric chair that they would have been using at the time. It's got like wires poking out of it, and a beanie and all of this stuff. But the prison is constantly lit in purple light. You know, the cells are more like something that you would have seen in they're more meant to look like the cells in like Alcatraz or something like that. Very, very sparse, very bare bones, the heavy in the bars, all of that kind of stuff. I will say those cells are really small for 3 inmates. But my favorite was the prison guards.
Yeah. Oh, and pink. Yeah.
Yeah,
Pads.
They looked more purplish to me, but
okay.
Regardless, pinkish purple. Yeah, it's that
Blue
type
scale,
of it's a very distinct color, and they're always wearing these huge hats.
Yeah.
It's more the type of outfit, not that color scheme, but more the type of outfit that you would have seen in the era of like Shawshank.
Yeah.
Something like that before prison reform.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're and of course their jackets have these huge shoulder pads. They're meant to kind of look a bit like a Bruce Timm style superhero.
Yeah.
Meant to look very big and bulky, and
it almost looks like what I would expect the jail guard uniforms to look like in one of the fantasy sequences in Chicago.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Very cartoonish, very, outlandish. The fact that somehow the prisoners are able to access the same area as the visitors. The little, it's like, I don't think they'd even be able to sneak over there. But, obviously that's how they do the switch. But there is a scene before we do the switch, and I just want to briefly mention this because I was like, I feel like that's some sort of symbolism, and it seems like weird because it's not a typical look for this type of thing. But there's a scene where Nash is basically going to try to extort money from this guy, and he's lifting weights in the gym, and so he gets his heavy Lyle, who I want to talk about more later, to lean on him, and basically he is putting the weights, because again, this machine is built like no other weight machine, at least not during the 90s. They are free floating weights just hanging on a wire, and he's able to push the weights over to basically his crotchal area. And did you notice that on the bottom of the weights, there are 2 circle dumbbells? I'm are those intended to look like testicles? Because number one, that's not a typical weight setup.
Yep.
And number 2, I don't think that it would even have been typical for 2 giant balls on the bottom to basically symbolically be potential to crush his, but I was just like, that's some weird symbolism for an Ernest film.
Yeah.
But there are a couple of things that I do want to mention. And like I said, we'll circle back to Chuck and Bobby in a second. But the whole setup because the character at a certain point, the character of Reuben Bartlett, played by Barry Scott, basically while in prison kills another inmate, goes to Nash for help. Nash basically says, I'm only going to help you if you help me.
Mm-hmm.
And so while they're in the trial, Reuben, who for some reason is facing the jury. This is a court setup I have never seen, at least not in films. I don't know if are there court setups where the defendant is facing the jury?
I mean, Typically not, but I can't speak
Yeah.
for every county courthouse in the country. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But he is straight up facing the jury, sees Ernest, and realizes he's a dead ringer for Nash. But did you notice his lawyer, I believe, is played by the same guy that played the lawyer in Ernest Goes to Camp?
Yes.
Buck Ford.
Yes.
And I think, didn't you mention that this guy was an actual lawyer in that?
Did I? I don't remember.
Maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe I'm conflating that with something else. But he does kind of seem their go-to for a because I don't believe he was in Ernest Saves Christmas.
No. Yeah. When I saw him on screen, I actually checked to see who he was, because he's familiar, and no, it was pretty much just this and Ernest Goes to Camp.
Just those two.
Well, I think that he did have a couple other appearances as a lawyer at a bailiff. Actually, he has a decent list here of small roles he's been in.
I was about to say, were they all in Ernest films or
no?
in other
he also
projects?
appeared. He was a guard in King Kong Lives.
Okay.
He was a FBI agent in an episode in The Heat of the Night. He was a
lawyer.
He's a lawyer recruiter in The Firm with Tom Cruise.
Okay.
He was also in The Client. So a couple of different.
So probably a Southern-based lawyer, because I believe both of those were shot somewhere in the South.
Probably, yeah.
But
yeah, he's got a couple of things here. Played President Eisenhower in short. Yeah.
Seems like odd casting. He doesn't look like Eisenhower at all, but yeah, I thought that was a fun little Easter egg. But we also in that scene get some tremendous physical comedy by Jim Varney with the pen.
Yeah.
And this is the scene I was
remember that from
to.
watching the film back when it came out, to be honest.
This honestly was a scene that I believe was in the original trailers.
Probably. Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Well. But this is the scene I was referring to when I mentioned the Mr. Bean physical comedy, because it straight up feels like a Mr. Bean style,
yes,
antic, no words from him, completely silent, but he's chewing on a pen and it breaks, and then suddenly ink gets all over him, and he's just trying to get whatever he can to kind of like get the ink off of him. And of course, it ends up getting all over his face. At a certain point, he gets a piece of paper to try to rub it off, but it just rubs it in. And then he realizes he has nothing to do with the paper, so he puts it in his mouth. So he's chewing on this ink-soaked piece of paper, at which point everyone starts to notice him. And the judge, played by Jackie Welch, asks him, "Sir, are you okay?" "Oh, yes, I'm fine, thank you." It's just, I mean, is it a little over the top? Sure, but it's funny.
When you said Mr. Bean earlier, my mind immediately went to the dinner scene with like weird magnetic lobster. But no, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
The pin thing is classic Mr. Bean material.
Yeah. That I don't know that they ever did that gag specifically, but it feels like a thing that something happens. He's trying to fix it, and it just keeps making it worse.
Yeah, it absolutely does.
Very much Mr. Bean shtick.
Yeah.
Speaking of, there's also a scene in this film that reminds me of another comedian. The scene where he's trying to get the look and the mannerisms of never gets it.
Yeah.
Because Ernest is not Nash. Nash is not Ernest. They
also they're not giving him an awful lot of cues as to
they're not. They're like, really not.
It's just like you try. It's just like we'll tell you no, but
yeah,
just try. Yes.
Right. But he goes through kind of this run of impressions of, trying to, get it. And of course, it's basically just Jim Varney running through all of his, and I will say, as a kid, I didn't get most of these. Because he's doing Walter Brennan. I didn't know who Walter Brennan was as a kid. You know, and there's even the one he does towards the end, James Mason. No clue who that was as a kid. So these are kind of very dated impressions, but it reminded me a bit of some of the stuff. Honestly, it reminded me not as manic, but very similar to something that Robin Williams would have done.
Yeah.
Now, with Robin Williams, it would have been quick switches. And, he only says a line as this guy, and now he's this guy, and now he's that guy. That was
he would also be repeating the same line over and over again, more than likely.
Exactly. Yeah, it would be interspersed, but yeah, it did kind of, I will say, Jim Varney and Robin Williams knew each other. There's actually a video on YouTube that you can find where they're actually hamming it up backstage somewhere. And
comic relief. It was a comic relief.
Right. And they had similar sensibilities. They're both, highly, doing a lot of characters, doing a lot of, for Jim Varney, it was more characters. For Robin Williams, it was a little bit more impressions and, silly voices and things like that. So different, but similar.
Yeah. But now let's stop and imagine Disney's Aladdin, but with Jim Varney as the genie.
Honestly, that I was like, I feel like if anyone else could have done that role, it would have been Jim Varney. Obviously later on we got him as Slinky Dog. I do wish that Slinky Dog had a little bit more character, and then maybe he could have brought in a few more of those voices. But at least we got his because he's got such a great voice.
He didn't have a voice in Atlantis. He was doing a pretty
right, but again, his character was pretty
minor.
Yeah, exactly. But now I intended to talk about them first, and again we end up saving them for later. Chuck and Bobby. I love Chuck and Bobby in this film. They're just so much fun. Like I said, we get so much more from them in this film. We get, as you said, more interaction with Ernest, but Bobby in this film, again, I will say we get more speaking from Bobby in one scene of this film than we do probably in all the other Ernest films put together, but it is just one line. But obviously they're the security guards. Chuck is, just, he's typical Chuck. He's ridiculous. He's over the top. He's hilarious. They do the scene in the bank while, Ernest is having all of his issues with the floor polisher, where he's, basically not paying attention and dancing the whole time. What I love is the wonderful juxtaposition and counterbalance of these two characters, because we've mentioned, it's why they work so well together. But while Chuck is big and over the top, Bobby is silent and fixed. And his thing in this film is that he's basically a more, like, without the buffoonery, a version of Barney Fife. He is, he's the one with the gun. He's the one that is sure. He's the only one that really catches on to Ernest isn't Ernest. But he doesn't say anything. He just kind of watches. The one point at which I will say that makes no sense, I don't know why Bobby would do that, is when Bobby comes in while Nash is tying up Chuck, his brother, and Bobby just slinks off. And I'm like, and he comes in later to have a shootout with Nash. But I'm like, why wouldn't Bobby just draw his gun on him then? Nash isn't shown to have a gun yet.
Yep.
It feels like the Bobby that we've seen, hair trigger, ready to pounce, ready to strike, always coiled. Doesn't seem like that's the thing that he would do while his brother's getting tied up, is just slink off to pick his spot later. But like I said, other than that, I actually really enjoy the characterization of these two. I love the little bits that they do with Mr. Pendlesmythe throughout. One of my favorites is, they drop the cage on him. Yep. And, we don't see Mr. Pendlesmythe immediately after the cage gets dropped on him. But we go to Chuck and he's like, Mr. Pendlesmythe, Mr. P, you feel that acid taste in the back of your throat? And we go, and Bobby has put his gun up against Mr. Pendlesmythe's face, and he's just like, He's like, that's fear. And it's just like, well, yeah, no joke. But and then the bit with the invisible glass, I always love as a gag. Yeah. But then they do the and it's bulletproof, yes. And Bobby shoots it gleefully.
Yes.
But yeah, it's just some great stuff. I think it's the biggest role that they've given them, and I think that they use them very well.
They do. They work them in nicely. They're used to better effect here than they were in, the Chuck and non-Bobby in camp.
Right.
They had a good. I said before, I liked their bit in Ernest Saves Christmas, but they were sort of off to the side by themselves.
Right.
They didn't interact with anybody except the animal control folks.
Animal control people. They do eventually meet Ernest and the elves and stuff like that.
Briefly.
But they were used well there, but here they get more of a spotlight, and it's nice. Because even once Ernest is moved away from them, they're still part of the story with Nash.
Yes.
So yeah, we're still getting more of them than we have in previous films. Let's see. Okay. I think the last big character I wanted to talk about in this is Lyle. Yeah, who was played by Randall Tex Cobb, who was a former professional boxer, martial artist. Basically, he was a fighter. Yes. And did you look into this guy?
I did, because I recognized him, and I wanted to know where I recognized him from, and the answer was Raising Arizona.
Okay, yeah. I remember him most from this film.
Yes.
I will say his hair in this is absolutely ridiculous. Because number one, it's like he's got the back part that is kind of mullety. In between is short, but then the very front of his hair is like high.
Kind of like a bouffant up here.
And then split.
Yeah.
So it is, I don't even know what to call that look.
Yeah.
But it is, you talk about creating a silhouette for a character. Like, that is, for anyone that would know this movie, you show them that silhouette, they're going to be like, oh, it's that one guy. Yeah. They're going to have an idea of who it is. But yeah, he was also in Walker, Texas Ranger, Miami Vice, things like that. But he apparently, he was, a boxer and a kickboxer. His kickboxing, where was that? His kickboxing record was, I think, a little bit better than his here it is. So in kickboxing, he only had a total of 11 fights, but he won 9 of them, all 9 by knockout. Only lost 2. But his professional boxing record, and I think apparently he actually did get a heavyweight fight, like a title fight, with somebody. I don't remember who it was at the time. Oh, okay. He got a shot at Larry Holmes for the WBC title. He did not win that one. Apparently, it was pretty lopsided. But he had 51 fights, 42 wins, only 7 losses, 35 of his wins by knockout.
Jeez.
He was only knocked out once, only had 1 draw, and only 1 no contest. So, I mean, yes, he apparently, lost his only title fight pretty decidedly, but, in the area that he was in, still pretty dominant. But then, like I said, had, an acting career. And, in the film, like I said, Lyle he's the heavy for Mr. Nash.
Yeah.
And he really barely speaks. I think he really only has a couple of lines at really right before his character leaves the film.
Yeah.
And that's the only time he starts speaking. And he has
comments on the fact that Lyle, you can talk.
Yeah. But he also, at a certain, honestly, pretty quickly starts to, because obviously he is the heavy for Mr. Nash. So his initial role with Ernest is to kind of keep him in line, to kind of keep the charade going so that Mr. Nash doesn't get found out. But pretty quickly, he starts to get won over by Ernest, and finds him funny. He starts actually trying to help him escape, doing all of these things, and he didn't need to help him escape. So, you can tell that, he's starting to get on his side, but, starts to realize that, hey, this guy doesn't deserve this. This really isn't fair to him. And, again, after Ernest has already gone to the electric chair and everything. So, I mean, he's proven that he's immortal, basically. But Lyle stands up for it. Ruben is basically like trying to stand in Ernest's way. And Lyle's like, no, what, we've pushed this guy far enough. He doesn't belong here. This isn't right. Deals with Ruben and, lets Ernest go. And Ernest is even like, Lyle, come on, come with me. He's like, no, you belong out there. I belong in here. This is the way things work.
Yeah, the way it needs to be.
Yeah.
I admit we had something like in the vein of a tag scene in the last film with Chuck and Bobby and the Easter Bunny. What I wish now that I think about it had been the tag scene in this film had been somehow to orchestrate a scene between Lyle and Bobby, where there's no talking. It's I don't know, an interrogation scene where no one is saying anything or something like that.
You just get Bobby.
Yep, exactly.
And Lyle.
And Lyle staring back. And it would be like 3 minutes long. It would just
that actually would be great. Yeah,
like it doesn't need to be a tag scene. That's what needed the credits needed to run over. That needed to come up at some point during the credits, and that just needs to be on screen while the credits roll underneath it. Yeah.
Well, because they did that brief little bit of some outtakes or some extra they weren't even bloopers. They were
They
just
weren't
extra
bloopers. They
extra
almost,
things that Ernest had done that didn't make the film.
Some of them just seem like clips from the film, to be honest. They didn't even seem like.
It's definitely once it went into that montage, some of them were, not all of them.
Yeah.
But we got more of the impressions. We got more of Chuck dancing. We got all of that type of thing. But then the rest of the credits were run half screen, and I kept waiting for another scene to pop up.
Yeah.
And it never did. Usually they'll run something half screen while they're waiting for a scene, and once all the scenes are done, the credits will take over the rest of the screen.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Surprise, surprise. According to IMDb, there is an alternate version of this film that aired on TV.
Okay.
Yes. When aired on television, the movie has extra scenes not featured in the home video release.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, they did that a lot of times to because I mean, like we said, it's short.
Yes, but one of these at the very end, Ernest is finally a bank clerk. His computer shorts out and he becomes magnetized once again, except nothing metal clings to him, except the file cabinets are back for a rematch, and Ernest getting his
Okay.
So yeah, something would have happened after
funny.
I got blowed up. There was a scene with him as a bank clerk.
Yeah, and it would have shown that, well, I mean, I would have also liked to see Nash back in prison with maybe the dynamic with him and Lyle flipped. Maybe Lyle's not doing his bidding anymore, kind of thing. But I mean, at least we got to see that Ernest, there was a bit of a happy ending for Ernest.
Yes.
Not
that this is going to happen, but have you seen Paddington 2?
Yeah.
Yes. Nash gets a musical number. That's what he needs.
I mean, it would have given Jim Varney another song.
Yes, something else to run over the credits. Felix Nash.
Absolutely. But I mean, the song that plays over the credits, obviously, again, it's Bruce Arnson. But it's it's not on here. That's really annoying.
I will send this to you. You can put it on the show notes. YouTube has the deleted alternate ending.
Okay, yeah, I'd like to see that. We can put the link in the show notes for that. But yeah, I don't remember the name of it, but it's a very kind of like tropical themed song. That it's the same song that Chuck dances to.
Yes.
Please don't make me climb. These aren't my tree climbing shoes. It's very comical.
It's cute.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm not gonna play this video while we're here recording, but just looking at the screenshot from it, it shows Ernest as a teller. He's wearing the same outfit, but like the vest is buttoned, and he's wearing a gray tie underneath to match his shirt. So yeah.
I will say I wanted to mention that this is the first film we have seen where Ernest's outfit is slightly different. Instead of the regular t-shirt, he's wearing a long sleeve shirt.
That's true. He is wearing a long sleeve shirt. Yeah.
Yeah. And
I thought that was different, but yes, you're right.
Right. And of course, we get the scene with his closet where it's literally just like 10 different versions of the same outfit. I love the commentary that he gives, though, when he's trying to pick out his outfit. He's like, no, too formal.
Yes.
I like this one. I like the vibe. And I'm just like,
European
it's the
styling
exact
with
same
an American flair.
Yes.
No, it reminds me of like in the cartoons when Charlie Brown would go check his closet. It's just all the same shirt over and over again.
Yeah.
But
it's the visual gag, but they add something to it with the commentary.
Yes.
Which was pretty great, I thought.
Yes. I thought it was funny when they take the visit to the jail and Felix is preparing to switch with him. Felix is obviously dressed like in a jail version of Ernest's outfit. But what goes unspoken is like there's no reason for anyone to think like this is how Ernest is going to be dressed, because Rupert has seen him one day.
I was about to say I was so confused as to why he got into that outfit before they switched over to Ernest, and then once he's Ernest, he never wears the hat.
Yes. Yeah, it's not clear why it's necessary to put Ernest. If he's going to switch, why does Ernest suddenly have a different outfit to wear in?
Right, right. Yeah,
I guess because I suppose
would
they
have
just never want Ernest out of the vest.
Sure.
So,
I mean, I would have understood, if he eventually adds the vest.
Yeah.
But for him to just already be in those clothes before he switches with Ernest seems, maybe he just thought, oh, he'll catch on faster if he's not wearing a vest and a hat.
No, I feel like, as I say it out loud, I think the reasoning must have been like they just did not want any shots in this film of Jim Varney not wearing the vest.
Yeah,
So like,
as Ernest,
as soon as he's swapped, he needs to be wearing the vest. So
well, because I think that's part of the way that they differentiated him from Nash. But again, the physical facial work that he's doing I would have known who was who. I don't think it was necessary to. He carries himself differently as those two characters.
Yeah. No, when he's sharing a scene together, like he's doing a Tatiana Maslany there, he can he's convincing as two different people sharing a screen.
Right. So I do want to just briefly mention real quick, we've mentioned the fact that Ernest, it's revealed at a certain point that that Nash is up for execution. Yeah. Only right before they're ready to execute him do they move him to death row.
Yeah.
That wouldn't be a thing.
No.
If he was slated for execution, he would already be on death row. He would not be in the general population. That's obviously it was because it would have been boring
just how this jail works, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, also there are no jails that have purple lighting all the time either. It's just to
not outside of Maricopa County.
But I will say the execution scene, the whole way that all of that is done, feels like a scene from like a 50s B movie. Kind of the archness of it, and the way that the way the chair's electric chair is constructed,
the wires hanging, the way the folks are standing right in front of it as it happens.
Right, and the way that he gets his powers, and it feels like a scene that you would have seen in like an old 50s science fiction movie.
Yeah, it feels like it's being done in a cellar or a dungeon, and not in like a well-lit room, which is where
right. And obviously some of that look comes from the low budget. We've mentioned previously the budget for the previous films. I will say, I believe this is the biggest budget they've had so far, $9 million, and it made $25 million. So not a straight up 20 million like I think Camp was, and I think even Saves Christmas was under that as well. But still a pretty decent return.
I think it's the budget. The last financially successful one at the box office. So
yeah, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, but still 9 million, things are gonna look a little cheaper, but again, I think it worked for the style of film that this is. They didn't need it to be a slick production, that looked 100% authentic. They wanted it, or needed it really, to look a little schlocky, for lack of a better word.
And I think for the most part, the jail looks good. As a set, it looks fine. The bank looks a little cheap, but so what? Obviously a bunch of the money went towards the green screening for having Ernest fly and for having him shoot electric bolts from his fingers.
Right.
There's not a lot of elaborate effects in having magnetic stuff fly to him. That's a fairly cheap, Roger Corman-esque effect.
Right. I mean, it was great though. It was done to great comedic effect. The scene at the beginning with the file cabinets chasing him around and making it look like they have agency in this was really fun. They're like, it was great.
It's cute.
Yeah. And the effect that they do on the safety deposit box where they're like bulging, trying to get to him, kind of thing.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, there are a couple of lines that I want to get to. But before I do that, is there anything else specifically that you wanted to talk about this film?
Couple things. One,
Okay.
I was intrigued early on, and I wrote this down as all caps. The name of the prison Ernest goes to jail, the jail Ernest goes to, is a Dracup. Dracup, and I was curious, like that is an odd name.
Yeah.
What is up with that? And like it doesn't spell anything backwards. I couldn't make sense of it, and I was planning on googling this later to see what.
Right.
As
well, I think they call it Dracup County.
They might
prison. So I think it's the fictional name. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it is the name of a
where would they
county
get
in
the name Dracup? That
Sure.
doesn't even sound like a word. And
No.
as I'm sitting here watching the credits, I suddenly noticed there is a credit for gaffer Robert P. Dracup.
Yeah.
So I guess it's just one of the dudes working on the film, and I think he might have had a small like his best boy or something on a previous film or something like that.
Yeah.
But they must have just found his name funny and just give him the name of the prison. So that let's see. I thought it was a good use of Auntie Nelda in the middle of the film.
Yeah.
Where,
oh, I mean, that almost gets him out.
Yep.
It's great.
And kind of like in Ernest Saves Christmas, it's once again Ernest doing consciously in film doing a character.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not breaking the fourth wall in the same way that we're going to see in Ernest Scared Stupid, where he's just swapping between other characters willy-nilly.
Right. It's a bit more like, I mean, we saw him intentionally putting on characters to deceive people in Ernest Saves Christmas as well. So yeah.
I'm half surprised we only saw one of these here, but Nelda was used well. The joke with the balls also played well nicely there too.
Well, and I will say, I could have sworn, and even as a kid watching the video, I'm like, I feel like because they make a big deal at right before that of putting the second ball and chain on him.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I know at a certain point there was a scene where we saw them put on the first ball and chain.
Oh, there is. Yes. According to that alternate ending thing, one of the deleted scenes that got used in the TV version, when Ernest gets both steel balls covered with the legs, he originally started with one. He then pulls another stunt, and then the bailiff adds the second one.
Right.
Yeah, you're correct. The TV version he gets them at separate times.
Right. Whereas in this one, we don't see him having the first one until all of a sudden he's got two. And that's not typical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
I feel like that was actually even included in the theatrical cut and then cut later for, because I don't know that I ever watched this on television because I owned it.
Yeah.
But I do remember seeing that in the theaters.
I do have a note here. Robert Dracup did work on Ernest Saves Christmas.
Okay.
He worked on the previous one. I thought the existence, frankly, of the Confederate battle flag in Nash's cell was interesting.
Yeah.
I presume just because it's Tennessee, he's a bad guy, like he's in prison. It's just color for the cell. But
right, yeah.
That is not something you'd see today if Reuben is going to share the cell with him. Looks might have that. Lyle probably would. But
But also Nash is the boss.
Yeah.
So even if we're playing it up like 100%, that's Nash's, and he's a bad guy. So that's kind of why it's there. I don't think Reuben would have said anything.
Yeah. By the way, before I forget, unrelated to the film, but I mentioned we had a black lab named Rimshot. My brother's name also Lyle. Not
named after the character.
Not named for the movie. No.
The character was named for your brother.
Exactly. That's how it worked. So let's see. I made a mention of Ernest doing an Iron Giant at the end of the movie. Fly it up out there with the bomb.
Oh yeah.
And just because I have to do this, I know it's not the meat of this film, but the trial that Ruben has, he's basically on trial for murder, more or
Mhm.
less.
Yeah.
Although they frame it as being not quite a murder trial,
Right.
because it's happened when he's inside prison. I think they're trying to just like add years onto his sentence or something.
Right. Yeah. Well, because he's supposed to get out in a couple of months, and if he's
Exactly.
found guilty,
They're
he
gonna add
will.
to his sentence. So
He'll get life.
yeah, he'll get life.
Yeah.
It's interesting not to have it be a normal murder trial. Regardless,
Yeah.
Ernest gets called for jury duty. Apparently, there's no jury selection. Ernest is
No, I was about to say I don't know how
like,
Ernest made it through jury selection.
yeah. That there could have been a scene like that, to be honest. But frankly, again, if I'd been structuring that, the joke I probably would have played is have Ernest do the pin bit or something, do something goofy in the jury box, and then that's when they realize that like they need him on the jury. The defense does, and the
Sure.
prosecute, and somehow they just fake out the prosecution so that he's just a doofus. Surely the defense will strike him. I don't know. Either way, you
Right.
still put Ernest on the jury for other reasons, but
Right.
you don't need the scene. It's unnecessary. Just put your Ernest on the jury. It's fine.
Yeah.
Regardless, Ernest ends up going to jail in Felix's place, and Ruben joins him the next day. So apparently, this murder trial was 2 days.
Yep.
One day of which didn't appear to get much further than like opening statements, because they basically got like the jury seated and then said, we'd like to move this case to like the jail, and the judge
Yeah.
said okay. And then the next day they're at the jail, and Ernest gets swapped out, and then by the possibly, I think, before they go to bed that night, Ruben is
Yeah.
already back in the jail.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're right. That whole trial and everything happened the same day as the prison visit,
Yes.
which I don't think they would do those two things on the same day.
Usually not. No. Also, there was it's bizarre that the defense made a motion to move it to the jail like before the prosecution has put out its case, because apparently there hasn't been any trial other than maybe opening statements so far, and the defense makes a motion, and suddenly like, yep,
Yeah.
we're just not called any witnesses today. We're going to look at the scene of the crime.
Yeah.
So yeah, just a remarkably fast trial. To a verdict. I do appreciate the rationale for this is basically just Felix threatened everyone into doing giving a not guilty verdict.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and did you notice who was playing the jury foreman?
I noted this before, but I didn't put it in my notes, but I know it was someone who's been a recurring player.
It's Bruce Arnson.
Oh, it was that? Okay, that's right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep. Which, this is the first time I would have noticed that.
Yeah.
But yeah.
One more general thing was I liked Ernest's naivete when he's in prison, especially early on. I don't know how I would have done this. I wish that we had just gotten more of Ernest's like hijinks in jail,
Sure.
and less superhero antics. I thought that was the best.
Sure.
I thought the better parts of the film were Ernest being out of his element in jail, being in that different environment, and getting to
Sure.
see Felix interact with other, Ernest's people outside. Because
Right.
I like Barney's performance as Felix. I wish we'd gotten both of those instead.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's an hour and 20 minutes. And where most of the time I'm complaining about films being too short.
Yeah.
Or too long, I mean.
Yeah.
I do feel like they could have played a little bit more. Again, it does feel like some things were cut that I'm like, why were they cut? You didn't need less time. You could have done with more.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I think it served the plot. We got the plot. We got most of the characters at least.
Yeah.
It would have been nice, like I said, to have some of those things, but I think that we did pretty well with what we've got.
I did wonder if the whole Electro Man thing, maybe if that came first and the other instances followed from it, if all that was ultimately generated from them trying to crack the question of how does Ernest get out of jail?
Get out. Yeah. Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure that had a
it's
lot
like, all right,
to
so if we give him like powers to get out of jail, then we need to set up those powers in other ways, and then it just becomes more and more.
Well, and I like that they did set it up, because if it had just randomly happened in the prison, number one, with them taking Ernest to the electric chair, we all would have been like freaked out.
Oh,
like,
sure. Yeah.
You can't kill Ernest.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a way to establish, but also to assure the audience he's fine.
Yeah.
It's gonna be okay.
Granted, I still wish they'd scrapped the one in the restaurant because I didn't think that needed like the temporary. They didn't do enough with it.
Sure.
They could
Well,
have had him
the
do
thing that didn't make sense to me about the restaurant is, number one, his shock was much more mild to get that, and it somehow lasted longer. Because
Yeah.
I'm like, how did he get to the restaurant without being magnetized to whatever vehicle, unless somehow that restaurant is in walking distance?
Yeah.
And then how is he not, stuck at the door?
Yeah.
Or,
Like, we've
Yeah.
already set up and established like the precedent for Ernest being electrocuted and things happening. So it's not necessary to do that again.
Right.
So much. The bit of him getting electrocuted, honestly, we've seen Jim Varney do that bit better in other productions of him faking out being electrocuted.
The shock.
The shock.
Yeah.
He did that in
Yeah.
commercials and things.
He did that all the time in commercials. Yeah.
And the just the physical comedy of things that happen in the restaurant. Again, to go back to Mr. Bean, you could have used Varney's comedic physical comedy to better effect than just like he's magnetic.
I mean, I did like some of it because, there was the point where, the butter came to him. All of a sudden, he's got butter in his lap, and he just starts wiping it off on the breadstick, and the silverware starts coming towards him, so he hits it, and then he gets the knife stuck to his hand, so he throws it, and it almost hits the guy. I thought that there were some pretty good comedic elements. I didn't like it.
I'm just saying it's not necessary to have that beat in there. I mean,
sure, and it definitely was probably the weakest magnetic scene that they had.
Even of the things you just named there, my favorite beat of all those was him wiping the butter off on the bread. Like,
just the physicality of that. Yeah. All right. So, like I said, I do have a couple of lines that I want to mention before we move on to. But there was, and I had to write this down just because it was kind of perfect. But when, he gets his superpowers and he's about to leave, and he's like, Lyle, come with me. And he's like, no, I need to stay here. He's like, know what I mean? And Ernest looks at me, he goes, if anybody does. And I was just like, that's like great. It's like acknowledging the shtick without like being too, precious about it. There was the bit, and I don't know, there was just something funny about the way that it was delivered. But at a certain point, Nash, changes around Ernest's house, when he's gonna have
which he apparently doesn't
Charlotte
have
over.
Hours, by the way.
Yeah, because he didn't do anything until Charlotte said that she'd come talk to him at his place, and then all of a sudden he changes it. But Ernest walks in, and now there's like skin rugs and stuff all over the place. He's like, he walks in, he says, "I've been vandalized by Elvis."
Yes.
Okay. But my favorite one was, when he's looking for Rimshot and he can't find him because, at a certain point, Rimshot, along with Bobby, is the only person that knows Ernest is not Ernest.
Yeah.
And so at a certain point, Rimshot starts kind of giving him a hard time, barking at him and biting him when he is, trying to assault Charlotte. So he throws Rimshot in the trash can, and Ernest starts calling for Rimshot because he's like, where is he? Where Rimshot? And he hears him, and he goes and he pulls him out of the trash can, and he goes, what kind of a person would throw away a perfectly good dog? There are so many more like serious ways to put that, and he found the perfect joke for establishing this is a horrible thing for a person to do to a dog, but there's a joke in it too. So I thought that was really clever.
It's a good line, well delivered.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, those were really the standouts there. But let's go ahead and it is time to get into our segments for this film. So let us start with our moment. So this, of course, is our favorite or most interesting scene in the film. So Loren, what was your moment?
Ooh, I think it's a bit of a close call between the Annie Nelda scene, which was
Okay.
a nice use of her.
Sure.
But honestly, the one that I enjoyed the most while I was playing was just getting to watch Jim Varney go through his different impressions in the jail cell.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Yeah.
I wasn't sure where that was headed, but it was funny and well played. And like you said, even if it's kids in 1990, if you didn't know who specifically, that it's James Mason, if you came up on like Looney Tunes and stuff like that, other cartoons, you've seen impressions of some of these voices before. Like even now, I can't name all those. You said Walter Brennan. I can't name check Walter Brennan, but like I recognize the voices that are coming.
Right. Yeah, I mean it's just a fun sequence.
Yeah.
And also that is where we see, Lyle kind of starting to like Ernest too. Yeah. So yeah,
we get to see it gives an excuse for Jim Varney to play around with some impressions in character again without necessarily breaking the fourth wall.
Right.
Which I like it when the movies, find a sort of a natural way to put that in there.
Right. For me, I think I gotta give it to I thought I had it and then I remembered something else and I'm like, yeah.
Say your runner-up first.
I will say my honorable mention is the execution scene, because just the way that that's played out and the physical humor that's done there, and with Ernest getting superpowers, that's fun. I think I gotta give though my moment to the pen scene.
Yeah,
because just the physical comedy with that, and it's also kind of gross, but because by the end he is covered in ink and he's chewing on a piece of paper that is ink soaked.
I'll confess, gross was my main takeaway from that. Yeah,
sure. But the physical comedy that's going on in there also is just so much fun. There's just some really fun stuff happening, and the fact that everyone is little by little noticing him, like the prosecutor is the one that, because she's just like, because she's playing it so straight and looking over at this juror just having an absolute time. Just the way that all of that was handled, I think was done really well. But yeah, so let's move on to our Neldy Award. This is, of course, the award given to the character who was, again, either our favorite or most interesting. So, Loren, who gets your Neldy Award?
All right, so honorary mention here. I'm going to give it, since character is an option here. I know it's not supposed to be, but I'm going to give it to Felix Nash as an honorary mention.
Okay. I honestly, I toyed with that too, but I'm just like, it's still Jim Varney.
That's why he's
so good. He's so good at it.
Exactly. Yeah. He's very good. He commits to it. And it's a good use of Jim's talents.
Oh, absolutely.
It makes me. I watch it and it's like, I do wish they had gotten other things to stretch on film. Beyond her, he's good in the role.
I mean, at a certain point, you feel like he's stuck with Ernest because he got to have some creative control.
Yes, that too.
Because he had the chops to be as big as like Robin Williams or things like that. And he did some stuff, more towards the end of his career. But yeah, he kept coming back to Ernest because I think he got to play. He got to do what he wanted to do.
And I'm sure there's a certain appeal to being the lead. You know, I
Absolutely, yeah, because he was
there's
not
appeal
going to
to being
get. I mean,
the titular character and the lead of your films.
he arguably was the lead of the Beverly Hillbillies movie,
Yeah.
but that wasn't something that was going to come around a lot.
No.
Yeah.
And that was a remake. By the way, I remember reading, I think it was in Justin Lloyd's book that around the time Ernest Goes to Camp was being made, I think, that Jim Varney was offered a part, like on the Broadway or off-Broadway production of not Big Fish, Big River.
Okay.
To play one of the roles in like the Tom Sawyer musical.
Sure.
But he couldn't do it because he was already committed to do it. It's interesting to think where his career might have done. Not that Broadway tends to lead things, actors to bigger success than Hollywood.
Sure.
Does.
But he would have done well.
He would have done well, and honestly, Camp probably was the right decision considering how well it did, how it led to other films.
Yeah.
Anyhow, so yeah, Felix Nash as a character is my honorable mention here. My actual award is going to go to Randall Tex Cobb in the role of Lyle.
Yeah.
Because again, he was. I mentioned earlier he was in Raising Arizona. He was the bounty hunter Leonard Smalls in that. He was memorable, and he's memorable doing sort of a similar thing here. Very very quiet role, but very quiet but intimidating. And softer here.
Well, he plays the soft spoken. For not speaking, he makes quite an impact.
He does
in the film.
He, like you said, he has a couple of lines in this film, but honestly, he makes more of an impression than Ruben does.
100%. Yeah. Nothing against the guy who played Ruben, but it was kind of a very stock character.
Yeah. He's you were saying earlier about how someone was Charlotte was written. Yeah, Ruben is written as very one note. He is just crooked and like just Nash's lackey and just And Lyle has a little more to him. There's a humanity to his performance, which is it
had nuance to it, which was very nice. Well, I'm glad you said Lyle because I was really between two, I guess technically three, but because that means that I will be giving my Neldy Award collectively. Yes, no. Collectively to Chuck and Bobby. Because again, they got the most to do in this film of any film. They were, and they're just, they're always fun in a film, but it was a lot more related to the plot. Bobby's character was just perfect in this film, and Chuck was the perfect foil for that character. And just kind of the Bobby playing the silent, gun obsessed, but also probably smartest person around, and then Chuck the loudmouthed, not very observant, stick his foot in it, but perfect kind of counterbalance to his brother. I think, and that scene, like I said, where Chuck is dancing around in the office while in the background Ernest is getting electrocuted and running around. It's this wonderful juxtaposition of kind of the epitome of Chuck's character. He's clueless to what's really going on. And of course, during that whole thing while he's dancing around, Bobby's cleaning his gun. It's just you put all of these things together. It's just the juxtaposition is just hilarious. It's just it's great. I kept mentioning them, so it's nice to finally give the Neldy Award to Chuck and Bobby, especially because I believe this is their last time together.
It is. Yes.
Bobby would appear in some later films with other people, but I think this is Chuck's last Ernest film.
I believe this is, yes.
And he might appear in some of the later ones that I haven't seen, but I'm pretty sure that this is the last one he's in. nice for him to go out on a high note. But yeah, so we are now down, Loren, as you know, to the big question, the most important question, the question so important that Ernest himself never stopped asking it. So, Loren, my question to you, when it comes to Ernest Goes to Jail, do you or do you not know what he means, Vern?
I went into this a little bit hesitant.
Sure.
Again, this film does not
I will
have
say also the last thing we watched kind of put me on the back foot. I was a little hesitant as well. And I'm like, I don't know why, because I've seen this movie a bunch of times.
Yeah.
But yeah.
No, let's see if I can find it. Yeah. On Rotten Tomatoes, Ernest Goes to Jail has an 11%. Yeah, it does not have a solid reputation. And like I said, I watched it as a kid. I obviously liked it as a kid. But the thing I remembered most was the Electro Man bits, which from my own memory, I knew I was not going to much enjoy, and I didn't.
Yeah.
But on the whole, as cautious as I was going in, I still enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a whole lot more than I enjoyed Hey Vernon's Ernest.
I don't think very hard
No.
to pass that.
Yeah. Like I said earlier, there were parts of the film that the parts of Ernest in jail, the parts with Felix outside of it, I thought that were well done. I wish there'd been more of that and less of the the special effects hijinks. But I know what they were going for. And I thought, on the whole, I thought it hit the mark, especially for what I assume its audience was of kids of my and your age at the time. So yeah, I know what he means.
I agree. I do think structurally wise, this is probably one of the weakest ones we've seen so far.
Yeah.
But it's fun. And it's, it is unfortunate that, as we mentioned, this is the first one to feature Ernest as the lead. And so far it is the weakest, but it's still fun. It's funny. Like I said, I watched it a ton as a kid, and this is definitely one that I will probably continue to revisit, every so often. It's just a fun, solid little movie. I mean, I'm not surprised it's rated low on Rotten Tomatoes. It's not going to be one that's rated high by critics. No. And anyone that's not on its wavelength, I can understand not being behind this film. But especially
it has a 48% audience score, by the way. So this is one of those things where the
sure.
critic versus the audience.
Oh, well, yeah. Oh, I mean, the audience score is still lower than I would have hoped, but yeah, I mean, it's more of like a fun film, not necessarily a critics designed film.
Yes.
But yeah, I think it's fun. Yeah. And when you compare it to other Ernest films, I think it comes out pretty well.
Yes.
But
no,
yeah,
we could have gotten Ernest Goes to Cannes. Darn it, that would have been.
But yeah, so I want to go ahead and give everyone the opportunity to get into contact with us. So you can Twitter and Instagram. You can find me at The Flying Cow Pod. You can also email us at theflyingcowpod@gmail.com. Also check out the Facebook. Don't forget to check out all of the other podcasts that we have. You're already on the Patreon, so continue to support that. Check out Movie Battles, our Disney Pixar trivia competition. That should be coming back in the next few months. But Loren, anything that you want people to know about?
I'm on Twitter, so long as it continues to exist, at Loren Collins. If I guess when this episode drops at some point, if you're in the Atlanta area, I will be starring in Guys and Dolls with Players Guild of Sugar Hill.
Fun.
So come see me act and sing out there. But that won't be till April. So got some rehearsals between now and then.
All right, all right. So yes, that is the show. Again, thanks to everyone for listening and or watching. Loren, as always, thank you for doing this with me. We will be back next time reviewing Ernest Scared Stupid. So make sure to join us for that. But until then, moo. Know what I mean?
Mm.